Would it be a better idea to buy a house when prices are high but interest rates are low, or wait for home prices to drop but interest rates might be a little bit higher? That's what we're going to talk about on today's episode. Hi, I'm Josh Alexander from The Brokerage and your host of Orange County Housing Market News, your one-stop shop for all things Orange County real estate. So in today's episode, we're going to go over those two different scenarios to figure out what might be a better financial decision for you. That way you have a better understanding of how to proceed if you're trying to buy a home. So let's go ahead and get into it. So one of the questions that I'm hearing more and more often right now from buyers is, should I buy when prices seem so high but interest rates are still relatively low? Or should I wait for some type of market correction and then go ahead and purchase a house then? So before we go over those two different scenarios, we really have to figure out first what it would take to get home prices to go down in the first place, because that's going to impact how we analyze those two scenarios. So let's go over those first. So really, there's going to be two different ways that home prices are going to drop. So number one, we have some type of flood of inventory hit the market all at once, causing inventory to spike higher than demand, and that's when we start seeing home prices go down. The second way would be that we saw demand dip so much, and therefore inventory was allowed to gradually rise and eventually get to a point where inventory was higher than demand again, and we saw those prices drop. So that first scenario, having a bunch of inventory hit the market all at once, is far more unlikely to happen than the second. And I've talked about it in almost every single episode that I've had this year, but let's go over some of the main reasons. So number one, right now, the largest demographic patch in the entire United States, the millennials, including myself, are in peak home buying years right now. They're making up almost 50% of all homes purchased in the United States, and those numbers are going to continue at least for the next couple years. On top of that, we have almost 20% of homes in the market being purchased up by investors right now who are trying to buy assets to give them some hedge against the inflation that we're seeing in the economy right now. So those two factors alone on the demand side are going to keep demand high for the next couple years until we get inflation under control and until this larger patch of millennials all start to purchase homes and those numbers go down as well. Now on the supply side, as you probably know, we have the lowest supply we've ever seen in Orange County for this time of year. So if you check out this graph up here, this basically shows you the last 10 years of supply that we've had at the beginning of March. And right now, we only have about 1,500 homes on the market, where typically we have anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000. So supply would have to increase so significantly just to get us to a regular market, not to mention go so far above that to get us to a point where we actually break through and get higher than demand. It's just not very likely to happen. On top of that, that wave of foreclosures that everybody was talking about over the last 2 years is just not happening. Right now in Orange County, we have a total of 2 foreclosures in the entirety of Orange County. It's just not this giant wave that some people are predicting, and the data is showing month after month more and more clear at this point that we're just not going to have that wave of foreclosures. People just have way too much equity built up in their house over the last couple of years. So if they weren't able to make payments, they're just selling their house on the market like they normally would, pocketing a bunch of money, and then moving on to the next one. So that's really not going to impact the market significantly. And on top of that, over the last 10 years, home builders have been underbuilding homes. So there's a giant home deficit in this country, not only in Southern California, but throughout the United States in general. So really, to be able to make up the amount of homes it would take to really bridge that gap in inventory is almost impossible. I don't have a crystal ball. There could always be some major event that all of a sudden happened where we had a giant wave of inventory hit the market, but the likelihood of that happening is so small, it's almost zero at this point. The other scenario, which is far more likely to happen, is that something happened on the demand side, causing demand to go down so significantly that over time inventory was able to build up and eventually get to that point where inventory was more than demand, causing home prices to start going down. And the most likely culprit for demand to drop significantly right now in today's market is interest rates. So interest rates have already gone up over 1% since the beginning of the year, and they're still rising today. So if interest rates continued climbing like they have been the first 3 months of this year, we're eventually going to get to a point where buyers are going to say, I've had enough. I don't want these homes anymore. Interest rates are way too high. Homes are just unaffordable. And you'd get to that point where you see demand drop so significantly that inventory was able to build back up on the market. So even though that scenario is far more likely and the most obvious way you can start seeing home values drop, right now, nationally, as well as local housing economists are not predicting any kind of price drop. Right now, they're seeing appreciation slow down and predicting by the end of the year, we see that appreciation continue to slow down. But there's just not many housing economists looking at the data right now saying, yes, there's definitely going to be some type of market correction. So that's something that you have to take into account. Either of these scenarios are not likely, but the most likely scenario is that interest rates get to such a high point that it really pulls a lot of buyers out of the market and inventory is allowed to build back up. So I'm going to assume that we can all kind of agree that the most likely way to see any type of prices decreasing in the housing market would be that interest rates rose significantly. Now, one other thing that I need to address before we start talking about the two different scenarios is that I'm assuming that you are a typical homeowner. And what that basically means is that you are buying the home for the long term. You plan on living there for, let's say, 5+ years. You're going to be raising a family, making memories, and staying put for a while. We're not talking about investors who are speculating, buying a house, flipping it, selling it the same year. I'm talking strictly to homeowners that are buying the majority of the homes right now. And as a typical home buyer, the most important number that you really want to be focusing on is not the total price of the home, but you want to focus on your monthly mortgage payments. Because if you're buying for the long term, whether the housing prices go up or housing prices go down, it's not going to matter much to you because your payment is going to stay the same. And over the long term, housing prices have always gone up. So you really want to be focusing on, what is my monthly payment? Can I afford it? And does that monthly payment get me into the type of house I want in the neighborhood that I want? And if so, you should be out looking for homes, especially when interest rates are this low. Yes, they've gone up a little bit, but they're still historically some of the lowest rates we've ever seen. Okay, so now that we've got that out of the way, let's go ahead and actually break down these two different scenarios. If you're listening to this on podcast, I'll try to do my best to make sure that you can understand and follow along. So let's look at scenario one. So scenario one is that you're buying a house today at $800,000. Let's assume that you're putting 20% down and that interest rates are around 4.25% today. To make this easy, we're also going to take out the insurance and property tax and just strictly look at interest and principal payments alone, just to make everything flow a little bit easier. So with that $800,000, 20% down, 4.25% interest rate, your monthly mortgage payment would be $3,148. So let's go ahead and go over the second scenario. So let's say that you wait it out for 2 years and interest rates do continue going up and home prices go down by a total of 10%. So now you're buying a home 2 years later for $720,000 with that same 20% down, but interest rates are now at 5.25% instead of 4.25%, so a full percentage point higher. Your monthly mortgage payment is now $3,180. So it's actually $32 higher than if you would have just purchased the home today with the lower interest rate. Now at this point you might be saying, yeah, but if I purchased a home today and housing prices drop by 10%, that's not a great thing. Well, yes, obviously home prices going down as a homeowner is not a great thing. However, you need to keep two things in mind. One, we're talking about this as someone who is a long-term homeowner, who is planning on owning the home for 5+ years. And over that 5-year time frame, history has shown time and time again, it's very, very unlikely that you're gonna walk away after that 5 years with a home value lower than what you purchased it for. The other thing you have to remember is the opportunity cost. So what I mean by that is that if you wait 2 years to buy a home, what are you most likely doing? You're most likely renting a place for those 2 years. Now let's assume you're renting a 2-bedroom home and it's costing you $2,500 a month. Over that 2-year span, you are now dumping down the drain $60,000. So $60,000 goes to someone else's pocket and doesn't stay yours. On top of that, let's go ahead and assume that you are long-term homeowners, but you decide to sell after 8 years. If you look at the difference in interest payments you're making on that 4.25% versus the 5.25%, you're actually going to be paying almost $30,000 more. Even though your $720,000 home is cheaper, you're going to be paying almost $30,000 more in interest over that 8-year period. So over 8 years, not only have you wasted $60,000 more on rent, but you're also losing money paying it to interest because the interest rate is now higher. So those are really the factors that you do need to consider when you're thinking about waiting and hoping that prices drop. And again, the majority of national and Orange County local housing market economists are not predicting housing prices to go down anytime soon. So this is kind of worst case scenario of going down 10%. Most likely what's going to happen is you're going to see appreciation slow as we get towards the end of the year, and then slow to a crawl going into next year. So your home value is not going down, but interest rates are going up, making this problem that much worse for you if you're going to be continuing to wait to purchase a home. If you are finding this information useful, please consider hitting that like as well as that subscribe button below. And if you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to hit the bell button as well. That way you're notified every week when I release a new episode, because every week I'll go over different market information as well as home buying and selling tips that are going to help you out in today's market. Also, if you do have any family or friends that you think might benefit from this information, please consider sharing it with them as well. I want to get this information out to as many people as possible. So I hope you found today's episode useful. Until next time, stay healthy, stay happy, and I'll see you on the next show. Bye.